don't know if any of you folks have, well, I do know. Some of you have fiddled around on Slack a little bit. I've been playing on Loomio. I just created a couple of very simple polls that just for basic information, where do you all and where do we all see jazz journalism, and where do we all post our work? So, information like that would be useful. And I don't understand exactly why there's an end date on that poll. It seems like it could be extended, right, Alex?
I would be happy to walk us all through doing that, and we can even do it on one of those polls to edit it if you want.
But anyway, what occurred to me during the week was, that this is good for us having these conversations here about what we want to do, but also, these tools really could be useful in our own work away from these discussions, and it's a question getting familiar with them so that we can learn to adapt them and employ them, I think. Right?
Absolutely, and that's what motivated me to bring them into this space was the fact that I've had experience working with them in other contexts and felt like it could be a useful way for us to do stuff together. And so today my thought for using the space that we have as we're gathered in the internet space this evening or afternoon in New Zealand is to start thinking about how we could actually use these tools as a way for sharing information translocally and helping us get support in kind of digging into our own respective local beats and scenes as jazz writers in all of the places that we are. So yes, we are recording. Hello, posterity. So we'll do a little bit of kind of troubleshooting and tutorial on, especially on Loomio today. But what I wanted to do first was to just kind of start with just going around the room and add sort of our way of introductions or reintroductions could be to just off the top of your head say a little bit about how jazz manifests in your local, like near you geographically, sort of the local scene near you. What are the institutions that are help supporting it? What are the spaces where it's happening? Who are some of the people that are creating space for things to happen? So maybe take a minute as we're as other people are sharing too, to either jot down like on a little piece of paper in front of you, or like you can write a note to yourself somewhere on your laptop, but just like a few things that come to mind as to like what the question being, what is the jazz beat where you are? If you're a jazz journalist, what is it that you're covering, right? So so we can start with the local, but then I think after we can also talk about what some of the translocal pieces of this are. But first, I feel like for kind of introducing ourselves, one of the things that we're all bringing, right, is our relationship to the places that we are. And so we can start by just introduce yourself to those, because we have one new person this week. Welcome, Elliot. So everybody can introduce yourself real quick, just your name, and then say a little bit about your local scene. And we can do it kind of popcorn style, whoever is ready to go first. And then when you're done speaking, you can nominate the next person to go.
All right, well, I'll jump in. It's James. James Hale. I mostly write for Downbeat magazine, but I also contribute a monthly column of my choosing to an online vehicle called soundstageexperience.com, which is part of a larger network of, as we like to call it, hi-fi porn. So I'm based here in Ottawa, capital of Canada, I have to say I don't really have a local beat anymore because like for almost 20 years I did cover local music for the major daily in Ottawa as well as some broadcasts. But I have a day job, so downbeat downbeat takes up a lot of my time. In terms of the jazz scene here in Ottawa, it is the capital of the country, so we have national institutions which occasionally somebody does something interesting. The National Arts Centre, which is Canada's main performance venue, has 5 or 6 venues inside it. The last few years, every 2 years, they've been featuring artists from different parts of the country. If you know anything about Canada, you'll know that it's kind of very segmented and very regionalized. And so, they would do 1 year music from Atlantic Canada, and then they do Quebec, and then they don't do Ontario per se, but they might do the prairies, and then they do the West Coast. So, for example, the year they did the Atlantic Canada, that's where Jerry Granelli, the drummer, lives. So Jerry had a couple of projects. Halifax has a decent jazz scene, so there were other artists from there as well, and then a lot of other artists who, might cross over into jazz or electronic music one way or another, some improvisation. So that's kind of the national level, and obviously the national being the capital city means that we have quite a few national venues, so those are available to rent. So the jazz festival would use those. So that's kind of like the next level down is the Ottawa International Jazz Festival, which is one of the oldest ones in North America, second oldest to Montreal in Canada, is part of the same national festival network that is sponsored by TD Bank. So oftentimes whoever plays in Vancouver will also play here because the bookers work together. And being an hour and a half down the road from Montreal, which has arguably the largest jazz festival in the world, and lots of people coming through there, we occasionally, will pick up stuff from there as well. So we are, kind of like Philadelphia in the sense that it's not a huge city, but it's an hour and a half from Montreal, and it's 4 hours from Toronto, and Kingston is a big university city. So there's stuff that happens in Ottawa, in relation to those other cities. And of course, it's just a short drive down the road to Montreal, where there's a huge jazz scene year round. So not bereft of jazz. And then on the really local level, I work right next door to a kind of a 5-star hotel, which has a big golf course. If anybody knows anything about high technology, the name Terry Matthews might be familiar to you. Sir Terry Matthews lived in Canada for quite a long time. He's the richest man in Canada. He's actually Welsh. Spends most of his time in Wales now. He owns a big chunk of that part of the city, including that hotel and the golf course. And there's a jazz club in there. I always wanted to work next door to a jazz club. Now I do. And they have music 5 nights a week, 6 nights a week, and mostly locals, mostly people who are teaching at the university have bands. My colleague Peter Hum, as I mentioned before, some of you came on the line. Peter Hum was my colleague at the Ottawa Citizen for a long time, still writes there, and he's a very good pianist in kind of the Herbie Hancock vein, and he has his own bands, and he'll play there. And then there's also a place called Gig Space, which is a small venue, co-op venue, with a really good piano, and it's run by a jazz musician and some other people. They have a little bar. It's available for rent, and they reach out to the community, and people will sponsor the piano tuning or will sponsor a show. So it's an interesting little venue. So that's kind of the Ottawa scene. But I mean, as I said, mostly I'm covering stuff for Downbeat, and at Downbeat, mostly my beat is universities. I cover the post-secondary jazz programs, pretty much every issue. So that's me. Howard.
Oh,
My immediate right.
okay. So I'm Howard Mandel. I'm president of the Jazz Journalists Association. I write and I do some radio broadcasting Recently, I was working at WDCB, which is what they call Chicago's home for jazz. It's actually in Glen Ellen, Illinois, which is a western suburb. It's about 15 miles from my home, but easy enough to get to. And strong broadcast signal, and that's almost a 24/7 jazz station, a university station. And of course, I didn't get paid anything, but that's okay. In this case, I was repurposing radio shows that I had done in 1980 called Jazz Chicago, and these we called Jazz Chicago Revisited. And I just updated them with information about whether the musicians had died or ascended to some realm of grandeur. And I also do NPR stuff occasionally. Used to be a big part of my work. That's down quite a lot because National Public Radio news programs went to even more talk and less arts coverage. I used to think of my beat in terms of local, national, and international outlets. That's really not so much the case anymore because I'm not thinking about selling internationally a piece that I would write for a local outlet. Once you get it up online, it's there everywhere, and you can't really retool it to a local publication, I find. Also, there are fewer local publications. But I used to be able to write columns while I was living in New York. So I'd write a column for New York Press, and it would also end up at Ritmit, which is a Finnish jazz publication, and Swing Journal, or Jazz Life, both of which were coming out of Japan. And I had columns there in succession. And sometimes I could get The Wire. I had a column in The Wire for a while too. But that doesn't seem to be possible quite so much anymore. I moved back to Chicago 5 years ago, and since that time, I've been trying to focus a little bit on covering the Chicago scene, which is fantastic, multidimensional. Take much too much time for me to talk out the entirety of it.
Yeah.
But locally, I mean, I go to about 5 or 6 different clubs with frequency, and I see a lot of musicians out and around. And I'm also working on the board of the Jazz Institute of Chicago, because I thought it would be interesting to see the inside of an organization other than Jazz Journalists Association and see if anybody did it better or differently or whatever. And it is interesting to see that. The Institute has an annual budget of just under $100,000, just under $1 million, $900,000 a year. And it's got a large board of about 25, which are about, these days, 1/3 musicians and 2/3 people who can touch fundraising opportunities at the big banks and some of the large personal fortunes, I think, in Chicago. So that's been interesting to see how that philanthropic or just the whole not-for-profit scene now that works or doesn't work. But that's another part of how I consider my beat. Although I do a lot of writing for Downbeat and have since 1974, and mostly that's been record reviews and profiles, personality profiles. I think it's important also to report on business news, and I did that for a while at Billboard, and I always included that sense of what's going on in the business of presenting, the business of festivals, the business of agency, all that stuff, at least to be aware of it. It's a reality for the musicians, and it should be something that I think that the readership or the listenership is aware of too. This is a real job making jazz, and it involves all the financial complexities of any other independent contractor or entrepreneurship. So that's part of what I cover. And I don't know, musically speaking, my tastes are fairly broad, although very snotty and narrow. They're as narrow as they are broad, I like to say. But it does range kind of from blues and electronic musics, with a lot of hard bop and free jazz and traditional jazz and Afro-Cuban music and African music and indigenous music. I like to listen to all this stuff. Okay, Susan.
Okay, I'm Susan Brink, and I serve on the board of the JJA. I am deep in the middle of working on Jazz Heroes and getting that segment of the awards together. And I'm excited about using Slack to do it. I think that's going to be a wonderful way to communicate and help form a team and that sense of team. So I'm excited about that. I'm the jazz music director for the Hudson Mohawk Radio Network. I'm responsible for 15 hours of jazz programming weeknights. We report to Jazz Week. And I live in the capital region of New York State. And it's such a rich ferment for jazz. The jazz community here is phenomenal. We have jazz festivals. The Lake George Jazz Festival is known. The Saratoga Jazz Festival at SPAC is fairly well known. Albany Riverfront Jazz Festival. We have great venues like the Egg and Troy Music Hall and the Sanctuary for Independent Media. And a lot of clubs are starting to expand, like Cafe Lena is very famous for folk and has been for years. And about 2 years ago, they decided to open up a little bit their programming. So now they're bringing jazz in, and touring artists are coming in, and it's really wonderful to see. And I'm also finding musicians are starting to create series in alternative venues, art galleries and what have you. There's 27 colleges and universities here. So you have the Skidmore Summer Jazz programming. So there's a lot there. And I'm also seeing that not so much with the newspapers, but magazines are starting to grow, little local magazines. There's a new one out, 518 Profiles. They've asked me to write for them. And they're looking to do music coverage, not exclusively, but at least they're including it, which is nice. John Fenton?
Okay, yeah, well, I live in a very hot city at the moment. And our scene is reasonably, well, I say it's reasonably small, but it doesn't actually feel that small because there's just always stuff happening. There are way too many musicians for the venues, which is a typical scene, probably the world over. Some very, very good musicians. There's a lot of interchange on our scene with North American, Canadian universities, some European universities. So there's master's degrees swap overs. Like I'm going to a recital tonight of a Canadian master's graduate at the Auckland Jazz School. We did have 2 jazz schools. It closed down to 1, which is, I have to say, absolutely flourishing. Gets quite a few students from Asia who dive in at the deep end and never emerge again because they just love what they find. Yeah, so it's a funny scene. We've got one really sort of good quality dedicated jazz club, but it generally runs once a week. Any more than that and we would be diluting it. It's what works, so we leave it alone. It also runs some jam sessions on a Sunday night. Basically the old story of keeping away from pop music and rock and roll. So midweek, but we get a regular, we get international acts from Europe and America, New York, anywhere, coming through all the time, and a big variety, and certainly a lot of the top end Australian performers. So, and that's down to one of the jazz heroes, largely the program director, Roger Mannins, who is connected all over the world and everyone seems to know him and love him. So that's what makes it work. It's a not-for-profit scene in the sense that everything is focused towards paying musicians. And those of us who love this music just do our bit and we do everything we can. There's a hardcore cadre of people, and I suppose I'm one of them, that just do any job that comes up because it's what keeps the music alive at the moment. There is fascinatingly a thriving underground scene for experimental music, experimental improvised music, which ranges from electronic to people chasing people in train tunnels and honking at them. It has a big connection with Japan. It interests me how many sound sculptors seem to be coming out of Japan. So there's this really astonishing circuit of people that seem to find their way all around the globe continuously. I'm sure none of them get paid anything significant. They play for smallish audiences in a club called the Audio Foundation. And really, it's a thriving but small avant-garde scene as well. So there are other clubs in Auckland which operate on different nights of the week. One's out at the beach, that's called Downbeat, and that'll go about 3 or 4 nights a week. You can probably find jazz any night of the week in different bars, and there are a few tiny little clubs that they might be sort of Thursday, Friday, Saturday. But really, the heart and soul of the music is the Creative Jazz Club, Roger Mannon's Creative Jazz Club. And for instance, we've got a Swiss piano trio coming through tonight. And its programming is really broad. So we might get a 2 violin, 2 drummer gig playing really edgy stuff on another night. Yeah, they're very open. And also, Simone, like an example, next week, Simona Smirnova, who is a New York kuklis player, which is a zither. She's came here once and loved it so much she includes it in her world tours. So she's a jazz singer that also edges on folk music. So yeah, it's a thriving scene. As for my part, I have my own blog, which recently got rated quite well, and it gets a lot of traffic, and it's about 10 years old. Obviously there's no money involved in it. It's all about a labour of love, but I can afford to do that. I'm comfortably enough off. I do liner notes for albums, for which I get paid for occasionally. I do photography for album covers. I talk to groups about improvised music. I have a little bit of involvement in the Auckland Jazz Studies course at Auckland University. And I do some student radio guest spots. I was a regular for about 1.5 years on a spot called Cats Can Swim. I can't remember why it got named that, but anyway. Yeah, so it's a small scene, but it's a good-natured scene. It's filled with people that really enjoy what they do, and yeah, we've got the passion, and that's why it keeps working. Elliot.
Yes, hello. I am currently, very recently, moved to Washington, D.C. outskirts, sort of suburbs in Alexandria, Virginia. So I've been affiliated with New York City Jazz Record, a staff writer there since the paper really started as All About Jazz New York. So before I lived here, I lived in Philadelphia, and before that, New York. So I started out with Mike Ritchie, who started All About Jazz website. I started writing for the website, and at that time in the 90s, they were starting newspapers also around the country in different cities. So there was All About Jazz New York and All About Jazz Seattle and Philadelphia and a few other cities, and they all closed down. And Mike Ritchie lived very close to me outside Philadelphia, and we would have lunch occasionally. And he basically decided to get out of the print world and concentrate totally on the website. So at that point, there was a decision to make, because it was not an amicable decision necessarily for the newspaper in New York to continue. So the newspaper had to be renamed to New York City Jazz Record, and you sort of, not legally, but you sort of had to decide, were you going to remain with the paper, because up until that time, everything you wrote appeared on both the webs. First appeared in the paper, then it immediately went on the website. Since I stayed with the paper that was renamed New York City Jazz Record, one of the things I found is that my work, which is primarily interviews, CD reviews, basically whatever assignments there are for the month, I pick 4 or 5 of them, and Lawrence or Andre, who are the editors, tell me which of the ones I've picked I can do. And some of them are, they're fantastic. It's New York City. So it's, I've interviewed, for a front page, John Zorn for his 50th birthday. That kind of stuff, you love to do, and the paper gives you access to it. But basically New York was the only place that could support the newspaper like that. So I know the New York City scene pretty well, especially the stuff that the paper covers. So I'm quickly trying to learn the DC scene. So I'm actually covering New York still, from DC, but it's very different. What I found in DC is that there's kind of the well-known musicians who come and will play, Kennedy Center or something, a big-time jazz guy will play there. Or there in Alexandria, there are some neat clubs that have some local jazz. Birchmere is kind of a cut above that. There's a club called Birchmere. They have national kind of tour acts, and they'll have jazz musicians from all over that will play there occasionally, as well as other musics, blues or folk or whatever. There's a lot of different venues in the DC area. There's a DC festival. Part of it, since I know the history some, is DC rivaled New York at one point for kind of a hotbed of jazz, and that certainly is not here anymore. There are a couple of places in DC that certainly feature jazz, Twins Jazz and Blues Alley, and those kind of places are there that have good jazz programming. The other thing that I've found that's a huge resource here for jazz is Smithsonian. I'm recently retired from running a large human services organization. I'm a psychologist by trade, which is how I supported myself while I wrote jazz for the paper. But the Smithsonian, I have an affiliation with. I'm on the board of an organization we're working to have a museum actually of disability and disability rights on the mall here. So when I walked into the Smithsonian American History Museum, they have a great jazz cafe. Leroy Neiman, photographs of paintings of jazz greats, and they have a great jazz orchestra there that's supported. I think it's called the Smithsonian Master Jazz Orchestra or something like that. They put on a program every 2 or 3 months. I think they could do a lot more with it. What I'm looking for here, and I'm sure I'll find it, is that kind of corner place where you can see the creativity happening, kind of at its birth. So in my writing over the years, I've tried to concentrate on a lot of self-released CDs. A lot of women in jazz is an interest of mine, and as well as world musics and that kind of infusion into jazz. I really got into this in the 90s. There was a huge, there was a scene of Jewish music, klezmer music, the whole downtown thing that kind of got interbred into jazz, and I covered that pretty in depth. So that's kind of where I'm at right now. But I'm looking forward to talking to some kindred spirits here, which I don't do really much of at all. So thank you.
I guess that leaves me, doesn't it? Oh, no, John.
No, I think John.
John, you're next.
Okay, I'll try to keep this brief, and it's going to be easy to do that because I live in Cleveland, Ohio, and I've only lived here since November. So while I lived in Erie, Pennsylvania, Erie, Pennsylvania, I came here a lot because there wasn't much of a scene in Erie. Although my only, paying long-term gig is for the newspaper there, such as it is. It's a gatehouse property, so we'll see how long that lasts in a tertiary market like that. But I'm still there, doing a phoner at 8 a.m. tomorrow morning, so I'm happy to still be getting a byline. There's a little bit of a scene in Erie. I don't want to spend a lot of time with it and I don't have to. We have a outdoor festival in August that's 2 days. Day 1 is blues and world music. Hate that term. Day 2 is jazz and jazz adjacent. I was the onstage host of that thing for, I don't know, 10 or 12 years. It's a lot of fun. We had a lot of good people there. A guy named John Vanko programmed it. Don't know if any of you know Vanko. Got a lot, he's got very big ears. I left, got married, moved to Cleveland. Don't know a whole lot about the scene here. There are basically 2 clubs here and a kind of adventurous itinerant series that books edgier music in non-standard venues. Nighttown, which is owned by Steve Frumkin and Jim Wadsworth, is kind of the White Shoe Jazz Club. More expensive tickets. It could be the Blue Note of Cleveland, if you want to put it that way. Not a lot of real hardcore jazz there as far as I'm concerned. Although Cahill and the Ethnics will be there in 2 weeks. So that's always welcome. There's another club along the Detroit Shoreway that's wonderful called the Bop Stop. They're quite active. I believe they do 320 shows a year in that space. It's incredible. It is the only nonprofit music organization in the state of Ohio that has a liquor license. They have a bar, and the proceeds from the bar support a settlement house in town, a music program at a settlement house. It's a great program. The kid who programs it is a lovely sweetheart of a guy named Gabe Pollock. His programming is quite adventurous. That said, this is the home of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And I think the need to uphold Cleveland's rock and roll bona fides, which are, though I love the town, I've got to say they're a little bit questionable, as any of you who know the politics behind the placement of the Rock Hall in Cleveland are aware of. But that seems to suck all the oxygen out of the music writing in town. And there's almost no coverage of jazz here, none. The leading daily, the Cleveland Plain Dealer, had a newsroom of, oh, you know what, I'm not even going to talk about this stuff. Those of us who have newspaper experience here, I can't talk about it. I can't talk about it. They're down to 36 journalists for a community this size. Awful.
Same
Not a lot of
everywhere.
coverage there. There's an alt weekly here. Not a lot of coverage there. There are lots of rock and roll bands coming through Cleveland because of the connection with the Rock Hall. They get all the coverage. There's not much to be had. I'm looking for opportunities. I'm looking for opportunities in where I live now to showcase the scene here, because I think the scene is a little more vigorous than anybody knows. We got some really wonderful artists coming through town. The other night we had Howard, Greg Rockingham, and Chris with their new trio, what is it, Soul Message Band. It was a wonderful, very heartfelt program. I'm gonna blog about it, but it's a blog. So like John, it doesn't make any money and it doesn't get any clicks, but I'm gonna do it anyway because I'm retired now and I have the time. So it's almost like a writing exercise for me, but there's a lot more going on here than even the locals know about. And on a national level, I guess the Tri-C Jazz Fest is a big thing. It's the programming's been pretty commercial lately. I haven't been here in years to see it, quite honestly. you know, the ticket prices are high and the programming wasn't hugely compelling. The Cleveland Museum of Art occasionally brings in some really interesting folks. They had Amir El-Safar doing a maqam duo with an Iraqi qanun player last week. They'll do things like that. Henry Threadgill had his world premiere here last February. That was at the museum. So a fairly good scene for flyover country, but who would know? And I'm hoping that through JJA and through the resources that you can bring to a guy who was really a part-timer for a long time, that the word can get out about what's happening here. Do I point the finger at anybody, or are we all done? Alex, it's you, right?
Yeah. All right. Last but not least. So I also am a relatively recent transplant to my current locality. I live in East Hampton, Massachusetts, which is in Western Massachusetts. About an hour and a half drive from Boston, about a little less than 4 hours, so drive to New York. And given that it is a place that has relatively low population density, there's actually a lot going on in terms of jazz and improvised music that I feel like I'm just kind of starting to scratch the surface of. I think a lot of that has to do with the colleges and universities around here. So there's this 5-college consortium around here that has the University of Massachusetts, which is the flagship university for Massachusetts. Their main campus is based in Amherst, which is nearby. And there's some other colleges and universities around. So there's kind of a post-secondary scene that then, you know, people stick around and they look out for each other and make things happen. That seems to be the vibe of what I know about, at least so far. There's also, it's also, because it's between Boston and New York, there have been a couple of venues that have set themselves up to be kind of on the circuit when, you know, when a band has a night between Boston and New York, they can have a shorter drive if they, you know, stop in Western Mass on one of the nights. And so there's this kind of a monopoly of venues that are all owned by one guy whose name I forget, but the Iron Horse is the most well-known, that gets, like, you know, touring acts from outside of the area coming through. But also the Arts Center at the University of Massachusetts has a really great jazz series, and there's a guy here who books stuff at all of the venues around. There's a organization that he runs called Pioneer Valley Jazz Shares, which is kind of basically a nonprofit model, but a consortium of folks who care about the music, who, you know, support making it happen, getting people up. And as Rob is mentioning in the chat, there is this really interesting legacy of the relationship to the jazz world out here. Yusef Lateef retired out here, and in particular, UMass, you know, had one of the really pioneering Afrocentric jazz studies programs. I had Archie Shepp, Yusef Lateef, folks like that teaching, Max Roach teaching at the university. Kind of at it was a very unique jazz studies program, put it that way. And the echoes of that, including the Jazz in July program, that was a summer, like, you know, jazz camp and concert series that Billy Taylor used to run every summer, and now it's, you know, his protege, so we're doing that. So there's definitely an established scene in this part of the world. And I did my undergraduate. I was a music major at Amherst College, which is one of the 5 colleges around here. So that was my relation to it like 15 years ago. Now I've moved back to the area, and I'm writing about it and kind of coming at it with a different set of eyes and ears. And also as someone who I'm, you know, writing for Downbeat and have, you know, covered scenes in lots of different places, including internationally, and So I'm bringing my experience of having written about jazz in different local contexts to being here.
And BGO.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I used to work with WBGO. I was in LA for 4 years, and wrote some jazz stuff for LA Weekly when I was there, and had a blog, and lived in Chile, Santiago, Chile for 9 months, and did a lot of writing about the scene there. So I do feel like from all the traveling that I've done, it's always, I mean, it's really been my sense that like there's always a lot going on. If you just like add up all of the little things that are happening in all of the places, if there was just like a calculator that could just sort of add it all up, there's so much happening. Like, I mean, you can think about how many jazz shows are happening tonight, in the next 24 hours around the world, that there's a lot if we could just kind of add it all up. And so that's why, for me, this idea of trying to create a way that, whatever's happening locally, there's a low enough like threshold that the people who care about what's happening locally can kind of plug into something that's also circulating beyond the local. And that's where we are right now in this internet space, where we're all coming from different places to share our like shared experiences around this thing that we all care about, even though it's manifesting differently in the different localities where we are. And so, I'm coming into this kind of with a hunch that by starting to share those stories and experiences, and kind of geek out around that a little bit together, that we can start to actually generate some energy and like build some shared resources that can actually help people who are doing this in other places too. And so this is the very beginning of that process, and I don't really know how it'll all shake out, but my sense was that we started to like tell these stories about these places kind of to each other, even as a starting point. John, you just post a link to your blog post in the reading channel on Slack, like we'll all read it. It's no, like those are the kinds of things that, because I know for me too, I did spend some time in academia when I was in LA. I was doing a PhD at UCLA in ethnomusicology, writing about music in global scale, and I've published. I have actually an academic article for my dissertation that's going to come out next week in this academic journal, and like I don't really know if anybody ever reads it. So this kind of work of actually building community around reading and writing about the things that we care about, and sort of keeping up, working the beat, following the music and what's happening. We're here because we care about that, and my sense is that if we can create a space where that's just welcome and inviting, that we can start to share those stories and connect the dots a little bit more. So Howard has already started playing with how we can do this using some of these tools that we have. But really, one of the things that I'm hoping that we can start to do together has to do with just kind of putting these stories somewhere, and putting starting to create a way that we can kind of be in relationship with each other around the stories that we're bringing to talking about jazz, writing about jazz, broadcasting, repping the relationship to the music that we all have. And so today I kind of wanted to look at, in terms of the translocal pieces that we have, of looking at a couple of functionalities in Slack that I want to show people about how you can sort of self-organize things. And then also the poll function in Loomio and the thread function in Loomio, as ways that we can start to host our own conversations about what's going on And as long as there's kind of a critical mass of a few folks, even just a few people at the beginning, like, you know, we're 8 right here on this call, of just paying attention to each other's, you know, like heeding each other's calls for conversation, that there's ways that that can start to generate interesting things. And so starting with Slack, I'm going to do a screen share here. Share screen. Okay. So you'll see this is, so I'm sharing with everybody now the view from my screen. And so you can see over here that there's a list of channels. And this is basically how we can kind of tune in to whatever conversations are happening in the space, and also tune out to the ones that we don't really need to be following, right? And so the way that you do that is if you click on the channels here, you can browse all of the channels. So this will show you what the different channels that exist are. And a channel is just like a space for a conversation around some particular thing, right? So like I've created channels, James created a channel for ideas, for just like brainstorming and like thinking about things that we could do. I created a channel of listening, like what are we listening to? And then there's this, I showed folks last week, the Loomio channel is automatically integrated with Loomio, things that are happening on Loomio, which we'll get to in a second, sort of get popped in to that channel so you can see what's happening there. I also just created a reading channel, like you see a link of something that might be relevant or you know, of interest, or something that you wrote, you can put it there. And so the way that you join a channel is you just click browse the channels, and then you click on the channel that you want to join, and you can join it. So I'm already joined, I'm already in all the channels because I've been making most of them, but you'll notice that when you set up Slack, there's only a couple of channels that are automatically set for you to join. So I encourage you either right now or after the call to go into Slack, click browse all, click the channels button, which it says browse all channels. The other thing you can do, and this is where the self-organizing piece comes in, you can also create a channel. So if you want to create a space for a conversation to happen, if there's something that you want to talk about that you feel like doesn't really fit into any of the channels that are there, great. You can create a channel, give it a name, give it a description, and hit the create button. You can also, this make private option, you can also create channels that are just for specific people if there's like a internal conversation that a couple of people need to have. That's another thing that you can do. But for now, I have all the channels that I'm creating set to public. So then when you create a channel, the general channel is the channel that everybody is automatically joining. So if you create a channel, you can just mention that you've created a channel here in the general channel and people will see it. So like, I just created a reading channel, so I could say like, if I type at channel, this means that it's going to send a notification to everybody in the channel. This is a way of like kind of saying, hey, everybody. And those of you who have like the phone app installed will get a little buzz on your phone. And like, you can also do that same at thing to mention specific people. So if I wanted to say, hey, John, I'd type at John, and that would notify John that I was trying to get his attention. But in this case, I'm going to say at channel, which is going to send everybody a notification. And then I'll say okay. So that is now, those of you who have Slack on, you just got a little pop there. And you'll notice that the channels have that little hashtag thing. So that just is a way that Slack knows that it's a channel. If you call it, you know, # reading, that Slack knows that it'll automatically create a link for people to join the reading channel. And all you have to do is click that little link that was created in the chat that I sent to join the reading channel. So this is the way that we can kind of communicate in and out of what's going on. So not everyone has to be tracking everything. And so the conversations that are relevant to whatever you want to be tuning into, you can opt in and out of that way. So I mentioned the Loomio channel, and you'll see that there are these updates that are getting sent to this channel by the Loomio bot. And so anytime that there's a new thread posted in Loomio or a new poll about something, there will be these updates automatically in the channel here. And all you have to do is click on the link for it to open up. It'll open up in a web browser, whatever your default web browser is, Loomio in that browser. So now I'm gonna put that on my screen here. Are folks seeing Loomio now?
Not yet.
Not yet? Okay, then I need to do a new share. There it is. Okay, so now this is Loomio. And like I said, Loomio runs through your web browser. And what I've done is created a new thread, and this can be kind of our homework for after the call, is to go into the thread and check out the, so to get a thread, you just go to the front page of Loomio, the Jazz Journalists Association Loomio, and then you'll see all the active threads. If you haven't introduced yourself yet, you can do so in the introductions thread. And then I've created a new thread called What's Your Beat, which is a thread for discussion about this question that we've been talking about today of what's happening in terms of the work that you're doing. What's your beat? And so a thread in Loomio has two different things that you can put into it. So I'm going to scroll down to the bottom here first. You can make a comment. So you can just type, you know, anything about what's going on. So for example, in What's Your Beat, you could write like a sort of little mini paragraph about what your beat is and leave it as a comment in Loomio, and it would be there in that thread and we could see it. The other thing that happens in threads are polls and proposals. And so you can see here that Howard has created a poll, two polls actually. One, where do you see or hear jazz journalism? And another one, where do you publish and post jazz journalism? And he's created a kind of poll called a dot poll, which means you have like 50 points that you can divvy up proportionally over the options that are there. And what that produces is kind of an aggregate sense of all of us where our energy is going for both receiving and transmitting jazz journalism. And so you can see here, I've already voted, but so this is what the poll looks like when you open it up. So I have it set to edit because Howard created it, but you see there's a title, there's details, there's options. So the different, choices that you want to have in the poll. And then you have a closing date and time. So this, basically the poll will be open and folks will have as, based on when we want to have the final information, we can set a closing date, right? So rather than, the useful thing about these polls is that, it gets us feedback and then it closes so that we can then synthesize the feedback into some kind of, useful data point moving forward. So currently it's set to close in a little over a week. And then this is a dot poll, like, I was saying, you can allocate points over a system. There's a couple of options here. There's some other different kinds of polls too. You can have like just choosing from a list of options. You can have ranking things. There's all kinds of different ways that you can get information about sort of what everybody is doing in a way that just involves a couple of clicks for everybody rather than a long facilitated conversation. So this is something that I encourage you all to check on and vote in if you haven't already. It looks like a couple of people already have weighed in. But for those of you who haven't, check it out. And again, the way to log into Loomio is just go loomio.org and then hit the login button, and there should be an account associated with your email that you can log into. If you have not yet joined us on Loomio, feel free to just send me a note in the, actually, here, I'm going to stop my screen share and I'm going to post the invite link one more time for folks who have not yet joined us to join us via the invite link.
It's not letting me into Slack, saying my email or something.
Sorry, Elliot?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. I will, so yeah, let's take a minute to kind of troubleshoot our getting tuned in here. So I'll do that. First, I'm gonna post the link for Loomio. Invite. Oh. Okay, so this I'm going to post into the chat in Zoom here, the link for Loomio. If you click on that link, if you haven't already created an account in Loomio, that will get you into Loomio to set up your account. And then Ellie, you were saying you were having a challenge with Slack.
Yeah, I mean, when I put my email in, it says it's not a registered email with I guess the group or something.
Okay, so here's what I'm going to do. I will invite you. Invite people. Okay, so I'm also just going to create an invite link here. So in the chat here, oh, whoops, I just sent the email. Okay, so this is the link to join Slack. If that doesn't work, let me know. And then here is the link to join Loomio. So if you're, hey Michael, welcome.
Hi.
Alex, I've joined Slack on my iPad and my iPhone.
Mm-hmm.
But that's easy because there's an app, and I just said keep me signed in.
Mm-hmm.
How about on the iMac, on my
So
desktop?
yeah, there is a way. Similarly, on a desktop computer, you can get like the program and just download it on your computer. So
Like an app?
Yeah, it's just like an app, but on your computer, exactly.
Okay, so I've been going in through the web browser.
Yeah, I mean, you can use it through the web browser too, but like you said, if you want it to sort of keep you logged in and send you notifications.
I prefer it the other way because what it says then is, what's your password now?
Right.
I've been in there invited. So I guess what I just do then is lost password. It knows my email.
Right.
So it's linking me with Jazz Journalist Organization. So I guess I'll just go lost password, create a password, and then I'll have to relog from everywhere.
You can do that, and you can also just download the app on your computer as well.
Okay, and then I don't need a password to get in first time because it'll.
You
do I
should.
need the Jazz Journalist?
So you should have an account, and I think the first time you might need to do like, yeah, like I forgot my password, send me an email.
Yeah.
And then
Enough, then it'll know,
after
right?
that, it'll remember. Yeah.
Okay.
Because I know you do have to create a password when you create the account. That password is going to be the same across all the devices that you log in.
God knows
But
what that is.
yeah, right. But if you forgot what that was, like then you just need to have it remind you. Elliot, were you able to get into Slack using the link that I just sent?
No, I haven't. See, I'm using my iPad for this Zoom thing, and I'm using my PC to, as like my normal
Right,
thing.
right.
So
Oh, I see. So
I'm downloading the app to the PC at this moment, because
Okay.
when I tried to do it through the web browser, it said put your email in, and they sent me an email that said my email was not associated with that group.
Right. So I can also, if you give me your email address, I can also invite. Or what? It sounds like you're already. This is gonna work once you
Well, let's say it's installing it.
install. Okay, once it's installed, let me know. We'll get you in. Cool. So welcome, Michael. Yeah, you're feel free to come and just sort of dig around and see what you can see. You can start by if you click on the channels in Slack, you can see you can browse all the channels and see where there are different kinds of conversations happening. And then down in the direct messages is where it's sort of the directory of people that you can send messages to directly. That's basically how Slack works.
Yeah, great. Yeah, sorry to join late here.
It's all good.
But better late than never, I guess.
I think so. And we'll have, as you'll see, kind of we're trying to, populate our system here with, just some thoughts and ideas about kind of what the nature of the jazz beat where you are is, and what kinds of, opportunities are there for writing about it and, journalisming about it, not just writing, but also radio, video, the different kinds of ways that there are folks that are, disseminating and sharing information about this thing that we all love.
Yeah, cool. So I'm coming in late to the conversation. Did everybody share things? I was just listening to the YouTube recording of the first meeting, so that was great. And in listening to that, I realized, oh no, it must be Central Standard Time in America or something now. So I kind of jumped over on this a bit late. Sorry about that. But it's a little hard to get the times right all the way from Tokyo back there. So
that's okay. So you're in Tokyo.
Yeah. So I've been here for about 20 some years and writing about jazz for different publications, Japan Times and elsewhere. And now I have my own website / blog, whatever you want to call it, jazzinjapan.com. So if anybody's interested, please check it out. So, but happy to be here and jump in on this. I think it sounds really promising. And I think it's really great to kind of link up like this across the globe, since jazz is linked up across the globe, we might as well be as well. So,
that's right.
Yeah, very cool.
Yeah, well, I'm glad we caught you, even if it's just for the tail end of our call here, because
just for the tail end at least.
And you do have a somewhat time zone. Someone who's in Wednesday already is John,
right?
New Zealand over here.
Hi there. We're the Pacific. You and I, we're the Pacific beat.
Yes. Yeah. So actually, if you with the time, if you could put the date on there, I think that would help us out over here.
Yeah, I will be more more ecumenical about my my time zone thing. I know that's hard, and that's something I will be more attuned to for next time. We are trying to do it on
either add or subtract a day. So
right, yeah. So it'll be whatever
Great to-
time it is, whatever time it was for you an hour and 15 minutes ago is the time that
Right.
it will be the next 2
Okay.
weeks.
Right. I'll write that down. Okay.
If you could
And
send me that invite, Alex, it's when I downloaded the app to the PC, it actually threw me back to the
Okay,
web, to the web
that's
browser.
annoying. Okay, so I'm gonna do a. So what's your email address, Elliot?
It's NY like New York
Mhm.
K 26 at hotmail.com.
nyk26@hotmail.com.
Right.
Okay. I am going to send you an email invitation now. Okay. All right, so I just sent you an email invitation.
Got it. Thank you.
That should get you through.
Do it.
And so, yeah, so thinking about this week, my hope is that we can try some stuff on here. So, we've got a little bit of back and forth happening in the ideas channel on Slack. I've started sharing a couple of things in the reading thread. And then, like I said, there's this poll that Howard created in Loomio about, just getting a sense for everybody where you're publishing and where you're reading and listening. So other ideas are welcome. And if you have any, just if you want to just say, I have an idea about doing it, but I'm not quite sure how, reach out to me on Slack and I can help walk you through the, kind of figuring out how we want to do it. Because honestly, a lot of the kind of possibilities of and the creativity in using these platforms is really about the ways that we're asking the questions, the ways that we're facilitating the conversation, and the way that the technology is interfacing with that. So really, it's not just about what button do I push, but really oftentimes it's really thinking through, okay, what are the kinds of things that I want to learn from this group of people? What kinds of questions do I need to ask? And then we can start getting into, okay, what kinds of tools are going to be useful in the suite of tools that we have for getting from the questions that you have to some more actionable or useful bits of information from the group.
Yeah. Yeah, all of that sounds great. And I was just listening to the YouTube, as I said, I thought all of that sounds really good. So, it seems really, really promising to get some exchange going. And, especially over here in Tokyo, where I'm a little not isolated, I wouldn't say that in the middle of Tokyo, but isolated from the rest of the jazz journalist community in some sense. There's lots of Japanese jazz journalists, of course, but trying to move stuff into English, that's especially helpful to me. So I'm really looking forward to that. Great.
Yeah, and another thing that we can all do is just post our stuff, right? If you got stuff that you're working on, whether it's a review that something that you're listening to in the listening channel, or you have a new post up on your blog, share it in the reading channel, and that's a great place to start too.
Yeah,
Alex,
okay, great.
Can I say some stuff here about this?
Yeah, go ahead.
I think that the tools you're showing us are really good for communication. And when we're talking about internal communications for the most part, and one of the things that struck me when everybody's talking about their scenes, it is true, and I think we've felt this for a long time, all of us, that there's much more going on than we have the opportunity to really report about, write about. And the point is to tell other people, not just to tell us. So, early on, like in the 90s, when the JJ first had a website, Jazz House, we had these things, postcards. And these were like early blog pieces. This is before blogs was a thing. So we would write, about, I just came to this festival, I did this. It was mostly for the other writers, although it was public, so anybody could see it. And, I've tried to do something like that with articles on JJA News, although, frankly, since I'm now editing JJA News as well as all these other things, I get behind schedule on that seriously. For instance, I just put up a piece by Jose Santos, our members in Havana, and he was really thrilled to see it. So then he sent me another piece, which I haven't put up yet. And when John sent me something from Auckland, I've tried to get that up. Sometimes I forget. Also, Michael, being in Japan, he has something to report to us. But and I think that the idea of sharing the work that we are doing, if we can help each other share the work, that is a useful thing. Nate
Exactly.
Chanin said that at a JJA Jazz Awards event a couple of years ago when he was speaking after winning the Writing of the Year award, saying that the best thing we can do is to share and repost and retweet each other's stuff. If that's what amplifies the reach of the media. But I don't think that the tools that we're working with here are facing the public. And I think that that's something that John Ciccone wants to work on. Like, how do we get this blog piece read? Yes, we can put up a blog piece, but how do we get it read? And, John, you share that link, and then I'll try to share that on my Facebook page, and I hope you'll do the same, and blah, blah, blah. I think that that's all good. But these are the things that we have to be working on, is how to, and also, why should people be reading us? Is it just to know about the music they already love? Or do we have some sort of, something to say to wake up the non-jazz love, the person who's not crazy about this, about why they have to read this, what this story hook is. I mean, I'm reading, what Rob Shepard is saying from Austin on the chat. And again, he's in a presumably music-rich city where he's having a hard time breaking into print, although he's got some pretty good clips. So, what can we offer to a colleague like that? Ideas, suggestions. Do we need to offer a platform? I had lunch last week with Art Lang, who's the president of the Jazz Journalists Association before I was. And Art, while he was president, put out 2 mimeographed publications, the best of the JJA members of the year. So these are really like low-level publications. I mean, people send in their newspaper clippings, and Art had them Xeroxed, and they were taken together. Presumably, if the JJA had staff, and that staff had time, we could put together some sort of anthology of that, and do an e-book or something like that of it. This all takes staff and time resources that we don't have. But I'd like to suggest that that's the way we need to be brainstorming, thinking of more ways that we can find outlets, more outlets that we can encourage. How can we penetrate those outlets that are out there and find new ones? I mean, John Ciccone mentioned the museum in Cleveland doing jazz stuff. I mean, I'm thinking these days that institutions of that sort that have a stake in claiming to be representing intelligent culture should be able to publish a music article now and then that is relative to their programming, but not maybe directly associated. You have to sell them on that idea. And similarly, Elliot, in DC, I mean, I know a bunch of people who could take you around to the dives. So,
Cool.
I put some of those on the chat.
Subway stops running at midnight here. I can't believe that. That's the problem.
Hitchhiking is the only way, I guess.
Uber or something.
Yeah.
Yes.
But, I think the tools, again, are really good. And, we can play with these. But it's not just to play with them. I mean, we've got to be thinking about some sort of way to really implement and reaching the public. and reaching our editors to figure out how we can speak for music journalism and arts journalism, indeed, having some higher profile than it's got. And if editors and publishers aren't doing it, do we have to take it on ourselves? I mean, that's a serious question. It's I'm sure we'll all grapple with that.
In
Yeah,
terms,
Well, and in the words of the immortal James Brown, you got to use what you want. You use what you got to get what you want, right? So the idea here is that you know, by gathering together, that we're trying to, as we go, we're kind of figuring out what it is that we have at our disposal, right? We don't have a $900,000 a year budget with all of this staff time that we can just sort of be like, go do this and it'll work. But we do have, you know, different ways that we are all kind of interested in the same things happening, and also that we're trying to make space for it in our lives in different ways. And we need different things in order to make that space possible, you know? And so by kind of getting a critical mass of people together, I feel like by starting with how can we just be supporting each other and kind of doing the things that we want to do, that then our publics will be the place that starts to happen. And then that will be the point from which then we have, you know, it would be really easy to organize like a channel of like, you know, retweet my stuff, you know, and like, this is something that there's a network of freelancers that I'm a part of that they're called Study Hall, that just has a little email thread that's like, you know, at once a year, you can ask this whole list of 3,000 people to retweet your story. So you get like a boost, you know? And so in other words, there are ways that we can start to use our collective, the formation of this network that's just starting to happen, even though it's kind of internally focused, to use that kind of glue to start to, you know, signal boost things and to have a little bit more of a place for it to go. Because the other problem is, because there's so much happening and the internet, it's all happening on the internet, the challenge is actually finding anything and for anything to even be relevant, you know? And so that's where the work of, you know, kind of getting a sense of where everyone else is at and really having an understanding of this kind of translocal network of jazz aficionados, you know, people who are dedicated to making space in their lives to make this work, that we can, you know, start to get to these questions that Howard is very rightfully, in his position as president of this esteemed organization, you know, fretting about.
Well, let's then do that. Let's figure on doing some of that brainstorming, you know, on Loomio or Slack. But what would you like this group? Like Michael says, it's very promising that we're getting together. So, what is the promise?
Yeah, what would be helpful?
You know,
right?
what can we do for each other? This sort of thing.
Exactly.
Well, I can think of several things just off the top of my head, kind of responding to what you said. It seems to me there's, you know, communicating between all of us is really important. So that's one thing. But we also, I think as Howard said, we need to communicate to jazz fans who are already jazz fans. And then, at least to me, kind of working with students and trying to get them interested in jazz, taking them out to jazz clubs. I mean, there's kind of half fans, you know, that kind of know about jazz, but they don't really know about jazz. And then there's other groups, you know, which are going to be fans or could be fans, you know, and so we have to kind of, you know, have a several pronged approach in connecting to those people, I think, you know, because what you would say to an already jazz loving person is really different from what you'd say to a, well, maybe I have an evening open, I could go out kind of potential fan. So that's one thing. Another thing I think is, as Howard, I think, touched on, like putting together an ebook, I think is really important. I mean, to me, as a educator, you know, I really feel that once people do get kind of educated, they're interested, you know, and at least to me, that's something that, you know, I kind of do as my day job all the time. But, you know, putting together an ebook of thoughts, you know, about jazz or larger issues of music and emotion, I mean, all of those things, however it's framed, you know, ebooks are kind of advertising as much as they are a book, you know. So there's kind of an ebook that's a summary of a set of ideas that is sort of enacting for people, right? So that's another thread. And then I think the other thing that Alex just said was that you know, in some ways there's a kind of overload of information, you know, but how do you find that information? So for example, in Tokyo, there's some great groups that come through, but they might be from Norway, you know, kind of free improv Norway jazz group. And I never heard of them before, but I know somebody somewhere has, and somebody has written about them, right? So, you know, kind of making all of that easy, at least to me, is what this technology should do. Yeah, sure, I could dig up the information on this band and link it, but, you know, kind of hearing from people that I know or that, you know, or writing about this all the time or may have seen them somewhere, having that information to put up on my site is a great way to introduce that band from Norway coming to Tokyo, for example. So I'm not sure how to share all that stuff or how to make it easy to retweet, but I know, at least for myself with my busy schedule, even just trying to find, you know, 5 minutes to track something down, put it up, get it into place, that's sometimes the hurdle that just makes me think, screw it, man, you know, I need another cup of coffee or something, you know. So if these tools, which look great to me just at first glance, can kind of facilitate our communication in order to communicate out to listeners, wow, that's something, I think. So
I can, you know,
anyway,
some of those groups come through the South Pacific on their way up to Tokyo. Yeah, you get a big, and yeah, that's a really good idea. I can flick you, if we've been to a concert, been impressed by it, I can flick you information.
Yeah.
And we could even, I'm even thinking, like, you know, if we have people in different places and they're, you know, we can start to track circuits actually, which could be really interesting. Yeah.
Another example is there's an album which I'm holding up called Stock. And I just, while we were talking, I got a message from the artist who put that out. Is a Melbourne jazz musician, and it's a sort of a mix of out and in, but a very interesting album. Now I'm quite connected into the Melbourne jazz scene. I'm really impressed with it, and so I wrote the first review of that before release, and this is an example of how these things sometimes work. I communicated about this album to Susan, who has played it a number of different tracks from the album a number of times on her radio show. And he's actually just emailed me now, thanking me and everyone else that this has generated quite a lot of pre-sales for his album, which is about to be officially released. And by the same token, I listened to Susan's show, and I'll connect with someone like Michelle Rosewoman. I'm just about to put up a post about her Hello album. So, you know, that sharing thing is actually, it's, I mean, very valuable.
That would be very attractive to me. I mean, a lot of the bands that I specifically put on my list to review bands, you know, that I've either never heard of or, you know, are somewhat obscure or you know, because I mean, they don't need Elliott Simon to review the next Wynton Marsalis CD, you know. I mean, so if we could all kind of tip each other off on these kind of young bands, nuggets, new CDs coming out, that would be of use, certainly. And I'll certainly, I mean, anything that I'm reviewing, I can throw up here and say, hey, this month I'm reviewing, Pure Chaos Vote Project from Amanda Monaco, and whatever it is, whatever odd, obscure thing it is. And most of these things like this, they're already up on the web. They're either on Apple Music, or they're on SoundCloud, or they're on one of those things that you can listen to the whole thing anyway. So that would be cool.
Yeah, and I find that a lot of the listening that I do beyond what I'm just assigned for reviewing per downbeat is, people that I have some kind of relationship like this with, right? It's something that I'm hearing about. One of my, jazz musician friends in Chile, is like, oh, hey, my friend has this new record out. You might want to check it out, and so I'll be, listening to something from a, jazz vocalist in Santiago because that's what I want to be listening to, is things about people that I care about, so that I do feel like a lot of the meaning of in the jazz world is circulating through these kinds of networks of sharing with each other, and these very personal projects that then are supported by relatively small but big enough to sustain the project, right? And again, you add them all up around the world and you have hundreds of thousands of people doing this, but it's just, there's no kind of central central control switch who's like, okay, this I can see everything else that's going on. And so it's just it takes a lot more kind of crossways paying attention to make this happen. And so this is the kind of thing I'm hoping that can start going through just being a sort of regular thing so that when you start opening up your Slack, you'll see some random things that other people are up to and some albums that people have been listening to that you can then check out. And so these are all things that we can start to think about and to work with together. And if something isn't working, if there's something you'd like to see happen, just like I said, please reach out to me, and I will kind of make it my job to troubleshoot and try and figure it out. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's good meeting.
Yeah, good meeting. Thanks, everyone.
I started a recommendations channel.
Okay.
On Slack.
Nice.
Good. And I tried to, I don't think I got Elliot in there.
Okay.
But I tried to add everybody.
Nice.
I didn't add Rob either yet. Anyway, so we'll meet back here next week. And again, it's not just a question then of doing the meetings on Tuesday, but like doing the brainstorming and
exactly
getting that stuff, right?
Yeah, and I think that this part of the conversation that we're doing right now will be much more, especially next week. I think that we will be able to get the most out of this meeting if we have done some trial and error on Slack and Loomio in the intervening week to kind of figure out what works and what doesn't, and what the kind of edges of possibility are. So then when we come in to actually kind of hash it out and talk about it together, that we'll be kind of doing it with a little bit more purpose and direction, because we'll have a little bit more of a sense of kind of what's possible with the technology in between the times that we're together in this space.
And previously, probably the only way to know what the members of the Jazz Journalists Association, what their blogs are or what the names of their publications, you do that, but you tend to have to go into their profile,
right?
And then it's been a long-winded and longhand process. Whereas if we had a place, and this is coming back to that idea before of Michael's, if there was a place where just simply said, like me, John Fenton, Jazz Local 32 published book on such and such. Just that simple with a live link. And so that's an archive, perhaps more for the activists, those that want to get in there and distribute stuff, make it awareness. I mean, I get about upwards of about 30,000 hits a year on my blog, and it's remained constant for slightly growing over the 9 to 10 years. So, you know, it's reasonably healthy, and I get new members every week. So, you know, if you multiply that by the number of activists, the people that are prepared to do something, because there'll be JJA members that are members that value their membership, but you wouldn't call them activists. So
At the
we're
very
here.
least, can we all, when any of us have something that drops, let at least the people in this group know?
Yeah.
I was thinking of creating a channel like, you know, this dropped this week. And because I don't know enough about a lot of you, and the best way to get to know about you, your interests, what you do and how you do it, is to read you. And I have the time to do that, frankly. I'm sorry to say, for those of you that have day jobs, I apologize. But, you know, just to begin, we can start from where we are, just within this group.
You always start with activists. It's the old union motto. You start with those who are prepared to do and get them to talk to two others, and then you get a movement.
Well, from that point of view, let's think about inviting other people to this conversation too. You think
Excellent
should be
point.
here.
Okay, I'm going to go to Nikos Fotakis, who is a great Melbourne jazz journalist.
Yasuniko!
Nico's a wonderful human being. He's, you know, hardcore sort of guy, but just salt of the earth. And he should be on this. You know, look, he's a real activist. He's right at the heart of the Australian scene, and he just needs pushing over the line. He should bloody join. I'll talk to him.
Thank you, John.
Great. Yeah, so that's great. So moving forward, it sounds like we have our work cut out for us for the next week. You know, we can try adding a channel if there's something that we want to see you know, be there, and if you're having any trouble, just send me a direct message on Slack, or start a thread in Loomio, and then invite folks to join. And if so, the way that it's set up right now is that the invite links that I shared in the chat here should be active for I think 5 days. So if you do want to invite people, you can just copy those links to invite them.
Do they need to be members?
They do not need to be members at this point in order for them to join.
But we can bully them afterwards, yeah.
You get the idea, yeah.
Carrot and stick.
So yeah, you get the idea. So, but those links, if you copy them, if you share them, they should be active for a few days. And then if it doesn't work for whatever reason, just send me a direct message with the person's email address, and then I can invite them manually.
Okay, cool.
All right, thanks everybody.
Thank you.
That's great.
And you're gonna.
When is this net? Is this like how often?
So we decided we were going to do them weekly in February to kind of get enough of a frequency for it to sort of stick. And then beyond that, we'll see what we need. So the next one will be next week at the same time, 8 p.m. Eastern time on Tuesday.
I mean, you know, that's a possibility, Elliot. If this is something that people wanted to say, you know, we want weekly Zoom meetings.
Yeah, there's nothing
to
stopping
pay
us
attention to. Yeah.
You
know, again, it's just a question of knowing where we can put the resources.
Yeah, exactly.
Either JJ or me or you or Alex or Jay. You know.
Yeah, because that's a part of the reality that we're working with, right? Is that sort of that in terms of the like institutional resources, we're starting from a very, you know, very small place, but the network is pretty big. And so it's figuring out how to strategically use the institutional resources that we have to activate the network is kind of how I'm thinking about it.
I move we adjourn.
Yeah, thanks everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Like,
Toodaloo.
Yeah, thanks.
See you
Bye.
next week.
Next week.
Yeah, see
See
you
you
next week.
later.